Today's date is 13 October 2018. We're at the Community Media Center here in Westminster. I am Larry Burbank interviewing. Your full name, sir?
Leonard Kirk.
Leonard Kirk.
K-I-R-K.
Good. Okay. I see you have your cap and some of your memorabilia with you. Leonard, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted. After the fact, I wished I'd enlisted because I know friends were in Air Force and Navy, and they got to sleep on clean sheets, and I had to sleep in a foxhole.
Uh-oh. So you regretted not enlisting?
Pardon?
You regretted not enlisting?
In a way.
Okay.
But I didn't want to go, excuse me, didn't want to go before I had to.
Sure. Okay, at the time you were drafted, when did you get drafted, and where were you living at the time?
I was living in Rising Sun, Maryland, around Rising Sun, Maryland, and I just graduated from Rising Sun High School, and I was drafted at Elkton, Maryland, and went to Fort Meade, and they put me in the Army.
They put you in the Army?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were drafted at what age?
I was 18 when I was drafted.
18.
Turned 19 in February. I was drafted in 1st of January, and I turned 19 in February.
Okay. Okay. The question I have now is the service that you enlisted, or you were drafted in, what branch was that?
I was drafted into the Army.
Okay.
And did my basic at in Camp Butner, North Carolina.
Camp Butler.
Camp Butner, North Carolina. It's right outside of Raleigh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall your first days of service? How were they?
Oh, first day, actually, I'd consider my first day in basic training, and we went into a new camp. Camp Butner was a new camp, and nothing but a mud hole.
Mud hole.
It was streets hadn't been paved or anything. It was a brand new basic training center. I can remember no matter where you went, if it rained, it was muddy.
Okay. Now, what kind of housing did you have? Tents or?
Pardon? Did
you have a tent for a house, or did you have a barracks?
Oh, they had new barracks at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, each barracks, I don't know, probably 50 men to a barracks, I suppose, something like that.
Okay. 2-story barracks or 1 story?
1 story.
1 story.
Yeah.
All lined up?
Yep. Yeah, all lined up.
Okay. And you, when you went through basic, how long was your basic training?
Well, my basic actually was probably the normal, 10, 12 weeks, but I spent the entire year in North Carolina doing maneuvers all over North Carolina, mock battles, and we spent the entire year of 43 in North Carolina.
So you spent the whole 1943 in North Carolina?
Yep.
Okay. How did you get through basic? Did you feel good about it?
Well, yeah, I didn't mind it. Again, we didn't have any choice.
Right.
At that point in time, you either enlisted or you were drafted, and wherever they choose to put you. I wound up in the infantry and spent basic training, learning how to shoot the M1 rifle and Browning automatic, a bazooka, which is a shoulder-held tank gun, anti-tank gun, and yeah, it was something you had to do. Always look forward to weekends when you get away from camp or maybe a week's furlough.
Sure.
So other than that, you did what you were told to do at 6 o'clock in the morning and fall out and line up, and then the day began.
So your drill instructors were friendly?
Pardon?
Your drill instructors, how were they?
Fine.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay. Which war were you in?
The World War II?
World War II.
Yeah.
Okay. What exactly did you do in World War II?
Well, after basic training, we were went by train to Norfolk, Virginia, and put on a Liberty ship, and sailed into the Atlantic and joined a convoy over to North Africa. At that point in time, I was a Army soldier, and once we got to North Africa, that was a holding ground for replacements for troops for Italy, because at that point in time, fighting was really heavy in Italy. And it was during the time we were in Italy, or in North Africa, that we were sent into up to Anzio because they had lost so many casualties. And when I landed at Anzio, they took away my rifle, they took away my helmet, and they issued me a helmet with a Red Cross on the top and a Red Cross armband and a medical badge, and I became an instant medic. So I spent, anybody that isn't familiar with Anzio was a beachhead that we were actually on the beach for 4 solid months on a strip of land 15 miles long, 10 miles deep, overlooked by the Albion Hills. And the problem was that the purpose of Anzio was take the pressure off, one thing, take the pressure off of landing in Normandy. The other was to take the pressure off of the fighting in southern Italy. The Germans were more or less holding the Allies. And the purpose of Anzio was to get behind the lines, march to Rome, liberate Rome, cut off the main supply line to the south. But unfortunately, what happened was that the general in charge, General Lucas, had a mind of his own. He didn't like the fact that the British were in charge of the landing, but he was in charge once they landed. And what he did that he wasn't supposed to do, when they landed, they were supposed to march inland and liberate Rome. The history would tell you that on the very first day, a scout jeep went 25 miles inland, never saw a German. But General Lucas decided we better dig in, secure the beach. And that's what he did. And we sat there for 4 solid months getting pounded before we broke loose to go to Rome. And that was one of the reasons why the very first month of February, the Germans did everything they could possibly do. Hitler said, drive the Allies into the sea at any cost. It didn't happen. But the Allies lost more doctors, nurses, and support personnel at Anzio than in the entire war. And that's why when I went aboard, I became an instant medic. My first 32 days, after 2 weeks in an aid station, learning the basics of how to give a needle, wrap a tourniquet, stop bleeding, I spent the next 32 days in and out of the trenches, caring for the wounded, helping those that needed help, giving morphine to the ones that you knew weren't going to make it. And that's probably one of the worst things. People say, why do soldiers have trouble with the war? That is one thing that has never left me,
Sure.
is the fact that for 3 months I was a medic. I saw people that were wounded that I was able to save. I saw people that were wounded that you knew were going to die.
All right.
It's always there,
Sure.
never leaves.
Sure.
And that's why there's so many soldiers come back from the war that the individual person, whether it's a relative or whomever, doesn't realize that no matter how you try to put it back, it sometime or other always surfaces.
Sure.
And I found that after 40 years, I lived with it 40 years before I could even talk about it.
Sure.
But then fortunately I had a support person, and I joined the POW support group, and she was able to get us to talk about it. And that's one thing that soldiers today, when they come back from combat, they have to talk about it. Most of them don't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. But then you find out that the more, excuse me, the more you talk about it, the easier it is to live with. And I found out after a number of years, the easier it is for your family to live with you.
Sure.
You don't realize some of the things that, not that anything was physical or vicious, but you don't realize that over those 30 years, things that could have been better if you'd only talked about your feelings. And most of us don't want to do that.
Right.
So, but that was my Anzio experience. And after Anzio, we had probably a month and a half of R&R plus maneuvers, and then we were put on transport ships and went into the invasion of southern France, which was to take the pressure off of Normandy, the troops in Normandy. And then it was after I was in southern France for probably 3 weeks that I was captured and became a prisoner of war.
Prisoner of war. What experience in that POW experience that?
Well, as a prisoner, well, number one, you learn the very moment that you're captured that your life isn't your own. You do what you're told to do, even more so than, when you go in the Army, you do what the Army tells you to do.
Right.
But then when you're captured and you have the young SS troop, in fact, the lieutenant that was in charge of the group that captured 30 of us, up to the time he was 18, he lived in Detroit, Michigan. He could speak better English than me. And but he was in the SS troops, and they were the worst. I mean, they'd just soon shoot you as, if you said a cross word. And so you found out immediately that you were a prisoner of war. You didn't have anything to say about anything. The unfortunate part of it is, for me, as far as being a medic, was that as soon as we were captured, they took all my supplies. So I still had my helmet, I still had my armband, but I couldn't take care of anybody. And unfortunately, the morning we were captured, about probably a half hour after we were captured, as we was going down into a meadow, shot rang out, and our lieutenant was shot in the back. I didn't have anything, to dress his wound or anything. And we carried him for, we got down to the bottom of the hill, and at an old farmhouse, we got a door, and we put him on that, and then we carried him for that day and the next day, and came upon a German aid station, and that's where we left him. Whether he made it or not, we don't know. But we marched for 3 days, and then they put us in 40 and 8 boxcars, 40 men or 8 horses in a boxcar, and we spent several days on boxcars. A small boxcar with the only ventilation was maybe a 15-inch by 8-inch panel, open panel up in opposite ends of the boxcar. That was only air, and as a rule, there's usually close to 50 of us in a boxcar rather than 40. But we spent days in that several times, and then I went to 3 different prison camps. The first one we went to, that's where they took all your information, gave you a number. There's numbers you never forget. Your Social Security number you always remember. Your Army serial number, even after all these years, you always remember. And your POW number, mine was 88589.
Yeah.
Those numbers you never forget. But that was probably, once they get all that information in the Red Cross, it's after that they notify your parents that you're a prisoner of war, that you're not dead or missing. And but that was our first camp, and then we were moved to 2 other camps. And then the camp where I spent the most time was in Moosburg, which was about 25 miles from Munich. And Munich, I found out after the war, because I had a friend of mine that was a pilot. Anytime that the Air Force went over on a bombing mission, if they encountered too much flak over a city or weather was bad, I was given to understand that they flew over Munich and dropped the bombs. So supposedly Munich was the most bombed city in Germany. And on any given day, they took a trainload of POWs into Munich to help rebuild railroad. Tracks had been bombed overnight. I was in a barracks with all medics, and because according to the Geneva Convention, which the Germans adhered to, the Japanese didn't.
Right.
But the Germans, the medic wasn't allowed to work. But yet, when they went into Munich on trains, several of us had to go along. We weren't allowed to work, but we had to stand there and during the day, and then come back at the end of the day. And quite often, you'd leave at 4 o'clock in the morning on a train to go into Munich, and then you might start back at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But many times you wouldn't get back for quite a while, because on the way back, the Allied would come along and strafe the plane, so they'd pull the train off on a siding. All the guards would hightail it across the field, get away from the train, and of course we were locked up in the boxcars, and we'd sit there till the strafing was over, and then we'd come back to camp. But one of the main features of the medic when he went into town, fortunately in Germany, every so often we got what they called a first aid package. And that was a box of different things from either United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, I believe it was. But they put up aid packages, and when those boxes come in, they usually divided those between usually 6 people. And they'd have soap and chocolate bars and cigarettes and maybe socks, toothpaste. And but the main purpose of the medic when you went into town was that you collected cigarettes or chocolate bars or soap from your buddies, and while they were working on railroads or bombing out buildings, you were there negotiating with the civilians to swap chocolate or cigarettes for bread. So when you hit it back in the evening, another good thing that the Germans allowed was that I think it was in October, they allowed the Red Cross to come in with truckloads of blankets, Army blankets, truckloads of Army overcoats. And the nice thing about the Army overcoat was that it had this big lining inside. Right. And you could split the top of the lining, and that was a good place to put the bread. So that, of course, you always had to give the guard a cigarette or a piece of chocolate, so he'd look the other way. But that was one of our functions, that kind of scatter the goodies around and wind up with extra bread. Because the only thing we had to eat towards the end of the war, and the Germans likewise, you had potatoes, you had rutabaga, you had some horse meat, but the only meals that we got was rutabaga soup. And it had plenty of potatoes in it, plenty of rutabaga, very little horse meat, because at the end of the war, there weren't many horses left, because the Germans ate most of the horses that weren't used for military, for food. And then, of course, we had the German bread, which was pretty much 50% sawdust and 50% flour, and hard as a brick. And it usually came into the camp. That was something to see. Was a flatbed truck come into the German commissary, and the bread would be stacked up on the bed of a truck, just like you stacked bricks, because it was as hard as a rock, and you usually had to soak it in your delicious soup, so it was edible. So, but it compared to the Japanese, the Germans, we didn't have it easy. I had my feet partially frozen that winter because it was known that that particular winter was one of the harshest winters that Germany had seen for a long time. And if you talk to anybody that was in the Battle of the Bulge,
right,
they'll tell you how bad it was. So, no, we had our overcoat, we had our Army blankets, and but when the shoes wore out, they didn't replace the shoes or the socks. In fact, I have them, and I'm going to display some of my things at during the month of November. I'm going to have a display at the Finksburg Library of a lot of the artifacts that I collected over a period of time, and I also have a diary that I was able to keep while I was a prisoner. That'll be there, and it'll be at the Finksburg Library in their showcase the month of November.
Oh, great.
And but the shoes that I had toward the end of the war was actually the sole of the shoe was just a block of wood cut out like a sole of a shoe with a heel and all. And then what they did was they'd take rough canvas and tack that around the shoe with carpet tacks, and then kind of lap that over your foot. And that was the shoes that I wore towards the end of the war. And and wound up with feet partially frozen. So, but all in all, you know, when you listen to and read stories about what the Japanese put our soldiers through, why we didn't have it good, but we didn't have it as bad as they did.
Sure. How long were you a prisoner of war? How many months?
8 months.
8 months.
Yeah, I was a prisoner from September till the last day of April when we were liberated, when the war was practically over.
How was you liberated? Who liberated you?
We were liberated by, I keep thinking it was, who was the famous tank commander?
Patton?
Patton. I'm thinking it was his. Well, it was part of his tanks that came through camp and liberated us. And we were liberated, and then all of us were given showers and deloused and given fresh Army clothes, and our first delicious meal in 9 months. And you know, we all complained about the Army meals when we're in the Army and have that every day, but then at the end of the war, when you've been in prison camp for 8 months and you go through the line and there's mashed potatoes and chicken and you find out that you fill up your plate and you take 2 or 3 bites and you can't eat anymore because and one of the things that really that I really remember is that of course they had the Army bread. And first taste of Army bread was just about as good as a piece of angel food cake. I mean, it was delicious. So, in comparison to what we had been having, so.
How many casualties did you see during captivity?
How many casualties?
Yeah.
Too many.
Too many.
Too many. Like I say, well, anybody's in a war, but I think the medics above anybody else. The fact that day in and day out you hear that call for help, and and you're up there helping people back, get them back, and you don't, you know, you hope all of them survive, but you know some of them aren't going to. But you know, I think back to how strange war really is. You can be in the heat of battle, like at Anzio, and maybe fighting goes on all day, and then all of a sudden, the commanders decide that it's time to stop and let each side go and gather their wounded and their dead. And it's like there's that utter silence. And they allow you to go out into no man's land between both sides, and you pick up your dead and your wounded. And then, just like that, it starts all over again. To me, it's just an individual can do that. Then why do we have to fight?
Right.
Or Christmas Day comes, and we don't fight that day.
Right.
Beyond my imagination.
Right.
So
I can recall at World War I, on Veterans Day, when the clock hit 11 o'clock, people came out of the trenches and hugged each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing, there was one experience that I had to illustrate that was when I was probably the third or fourth day after I was captured, when they took us into Lindbergh, and that's where they had the huge tents, and all the prisoners came in there, and that's where you got your POW number, and that's where they told your parents that you were a prisoner or missing. But Mooseburg was just a beautiful little town that reminded me maybe of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And we walked through it to a mile outside of town, and people didn't pay attention to you. They had beautiful homes, nice lawns. They had never seen any part of the war. But the same day that we arrived there, that night, there was a huge marshalling yard by the train station. And that particular night, the first night we were there, the bombers came over. We were a mile outside of town in huge tents. And it was so bad that you hugged Mother Earth. You could have got any closer, you would. And then you'd feel maybe some shrapnel come through the tents. And but that was the first night. The very next day, the day before, we had walked through town, marched through town, many prisoners, people paying no attention to you. The very next day, they took a lot of us back into town to help clean out with some of the houses, the rail yard, and people threw stones at us, spit on us. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just that contrast between
one day
and the next day. And what was a peaceful town yesterday was a shambles tomorrow. So,
yeah,
a lot of memories. So,
well, sir, you had a lot of experience there,
yeah.
And with all that behind you, were you awarded any medals or citations?
Oh, the only medals I got was I have the Prisoner of War Medal and Purple Heart, and all the other,
Right.
African Theater, the European Theater, the Good Conduct Medal, the Rifle Medal, but none of the big. I didn't do anything heroic. Did just what I was told to do. Tried to save some lives.
So I think you had a tremendous experience, and you did a wonderful service to our country.
Well, I did what I was asked to do, or told to do. I guess it would be more like told to do
Right.
than asked. So most of us that went into World War II did just that. We had no choice to go to college or whatever, but you're either enlisted and drafted, and whatever service you went in, you did what you were supposed to do, and I am one of the fortunate ones that the good Lord's been good to me as far as health, age, great family. My wife and I this past June were married for 72 years.
Congratulations.
Or are married for 72 years. And I think one of the greatest things is that I thank the Lord for every day is the fact that I have 3 children, 10 grandchildren. We'll have in April 10 great-grandchildren, 5 each, girls and boys. And to my knowledge, every one of us have good health.
Great.
And I think that is really something to be blessed.
That's a blessing for sure.
Yeah.
What did you do as a career after the war?
After the war, like a lot of soldiers, and again, you have people that put military people down because they can't seem to settle down, they can't seem to hold a job. I couldn't hold a job for 2 years. It wasn't because I was lazy. It wasn't because I didn't want to work. You just can't find yourself. And again, can't emphasize it enough that people have to realize that people coming back from the military, if you've been on the front line or in any kind of battles, you have issues.
Absolutely.
And you can't dismiss them with the snap of a finger. And but for 2 years I couldn't keep a job, but then I finally started settling down, and I got married, and for the last, I had several jobs, had several good jobs, but the last 38 years I was a manager for a vending company, Canteen Food and Vending. 38 years, retired from there, and fortunate enough to have a good retirement. And I've been retired for 30 years. Pretty soon I'll be retired for as long as I worked. Sometimes I wonder if I ever worked. But I enjoyed what I did, and
great.
I think that's one of the best things that can happen to a person is if you have a job that you don't hate to go to when you wake up in the morning.
Right.
You look forward to going to work. And,
Exactly.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely, I agree with that. What organizations, veterans organizations, do you belong to?
Pardon?
Do you belong to any veterans organizations today?
No. For some reason or other, I just didn't get into VFW or American Legion. And,
okay.
In fact, they had to kind of talk me into being, at my age, being a commissioner for veterans, for PO veterans for Maryland.
Oh.
And that's what this is. And,
sure, I see that.
I was appointed by the governor for a 5-year term. I'm in my second 5-year term, and which I didn't want, but there's very few World War II veterans left.
Right.
For some reason or other, Korean and Vietnam veterans don't seem to want to get involved, in being a commissioner. So that's why I went for another 5 years. I figured I could do something.
Sure.
We have close to 30 commissioners that represent veterans in the state of Maryland. We have a commissioner for just about, whether it's for women or Jewish or Purple Heart, reserved officers, POWs, disabled veterans. Each one of us have a purpose. I was appointed to be a POW to be representing POWs, but I represent any veteran that I come in contact with and that you can try to help. And there's so much help out there for veterans. It's there.
Yes.
It's there. You just and you really don't have to search hard to find it.
Right. I agree with that. Okay, sir. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your interview?
No, not. I think I've taught.
It's just been a great interview. It really
I think
has.
I've
I thank
pretty
you
much covered everything, and
yeah.
again, I'm just very thankful that the Lord's been good to me as far as health and age, and
You're looking
I
great.
still have the ability to drive, and my son keeps telling me when the day comes when he thinks I shouldn't be, I won't be able to start my car.
Okay. Very good. Okay, well, thank you, sir, and good luck.
Thank you.
And God bless. Thank you.